So today I'm going to be going over Module 2, the Golden Age of the Weimar Republic, 1924 to 1928, of the AQA A-Level History course. It's going to be a really long video, so just warning you. Well, yeah, let's start. So first question is, was there an economic recovery during these years, 1924 to 1928? Well, yes. There are some arguments that there was. For example, the government launched initiatives to build affordable homes for German working classes. In 1925, they built 178,930 dwellings. And in 1926, a further 205,793 homes were built. Also, American loans were used to help the financing of housing, schools, municipal buildings, roads, public works, and general infrastructure. The economy actually grew in their substance for this, 1924, 1925, and 1927. There was general growth in 26 and 28, but most notably during these 3 years. New industries were developed in the German economy, such as the large-scale production of artificial fertilizers, automobiles, aircrafts. So new industries were arising in Germany at the time. Also, ordinary German workers benefited from a rise in living standards. This can be shown in the real value of wages, which actually went up. In 1927, the rise was of 9%, and 1928, the rise was of 12%. Also, there was introduction of the temporary Rentenmark, which brought about an end to hyperinflation and disrupted the German economy of 1923. Also, the number of strikes in German industry really declined from 1924. There was a new system imposed that if you wanted to settle disputes, you had to go through the whole process, and this process really decreased the amount of strikes that were present in German society. Yeah, there were less strikes because either they went through these like this long arbitrary process, or they just couldn't be bothered and didn't do them. There were still some, but also industrial output grew from 1924, but did not really reach pre-war levels until 1929. Sorry. This is kind of unfortunate because 1929 the economy collapses and it all goes downhill. But it did eventually reach pre-war levels starting from 1924 to 1929. So in 5 years, the economy grew quite a bit. However, there are also arguments as to there wasn't an economic recovery. For example, the professional classes of the Mittelstand, which are the middle class, didn't really benefit from this economic miracle because industrial wages had drawn level to that of the middle class. So they didn't lose out that much, but they didn't benefit. Well, unemployment was still a problem in Germany. At the end of 1925, unemployment was at 1 million. And 1926, unemployment was at 3 million. Also, after 1923, the government made it easier to borrow money, which may seem like a good thing, but it's really not, because it's specifically for farmers, and it meant that they took these loans, but they couldn't really keep them up, pay them back, and keep up with these repayments. So these loans weren't really paid back. Also, Gustav Stresemann, the foreign minister, warned in 1929, just a few months before his death, that the economic position is only flourishing on the surface. Germany is dancing on a volcano. So the guy, he could tell the economy wasn't doing too well. Well, the Weimar government also introduced subsidies to and high tariffs on imported food to try and help farmers. But by 1929, there was a general agricultural depression, and well, the agricultural production was less than 3/4 what it had been pre-war. And this and the low prices of the food meant that farmers couldn't really make a profit. Also, many German companies tried to make efficiency savings by reducing their workforce. Mining companies reduced their workforces by 136,000 between 1922 and 1925. There's for example, also this can be argued that it's an economic recovery, but also not an economic recovery. That the inflation of the early 1920s had destroyed the savings of most landowners. But if you had taken out a loan, that would be, you would benefit because because the inflation, you would need to pay it back because you could have already paid it back with the money from the inflation. I don't know how to explain it, but if you had a loan, you'd be good. Well, Stresemann, like I said, he was foreign minister, but he also was in charge of the economy. He was chancellor at one point. So how did he do this? How did he stabilize the economy? How did he achieve this economic miracle? Well, he had 5 aims. Oh no, not 5 aims. He had a few aims, but 3, I think. Yeah. First of all, ending passive resistance. He stopped paying the workers who had refused to work for the French in the war. He also, this is very unpopular and risky, and it did lead to the beer hall putsch, but it did get the French to leave the war in 1925. He also introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark, which replaced the Reichsmark in November 1923. One Rentenmark was actually worth 1 trillion of the old marks. And this was supported by mortgage in industrial and agricultural land and backed by gold mines. And these gold mines also backed the Reichsmark when it came back in 1925. He also wanted to balance the budget, and he did. He cut expenditure, raised taxes, and fired 300,000 civil servants. The taxes were raised for individuals and companies, and this led to the government debt beginning to fall, and an increased confidence in the Weimar government, because people had just lost faith, and this was starting to bring this confidence back. Well, it was overall generally positive because the government gained support and stability, as well as vulnerable groups receiving welfare assistance, and in industry, real wages went up. And the middle class somewhat improved the living standards. However, if you're a government employee, things did not go well because 300,000 lost their jobs. If you're a small business, that wasn't good because, interest and stuff, small businesses really suffered because they couldn't really keep up. Also, farmers, their prices were low and there was a lot of debt, and the middle class, well, the workers earned as much, and so there wasn't as much separation between the classes, but also the taxes of the middle class increased. So their wages didn't increase, but they did have to pay more. Well, that is Stresemann's aim, but also Stresemann collaborated with America in implementing some economic aids, most famously the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan. Well, the Dawes Plan was implemented in April 1924, and it didn't change the reparations bill, which remained at £6.6 billion or 132,000 million gold marks, but it did set up a schedule of payments. It meant that there was an initial payment of 1,000 million marks, or 1 billion marks, and this was raised by 2.5 billion marks over 5 years. It also gave a heavy American investment in German infrastructure, as well as giving a loan of 800 million marks to Germany. It wasn't even enough to help with the first payment, but it was something. And it did contribute to great optimism and give the impression that Germany was its own master. And the Young Plan, this was in 1929, and it did reduce the reparations bill from £6.6 billion to 1.8 billion, and which is the equivalent from 132,000 million gold marks to 37,000. The schedule of payments, it was kind of the same, but they did have to pay them until 1988. It did help Germany because also they got Britain and France to withdraw troops from the Rhineland by 1930. And additionally, I don't think there were any troops in the Ruhr, but if they were, they had to go to. And also the reaction to the plan within Germany. Well, Hindenburg, I think he was from the DNVP, he launched this huge campaign against it and tried to pass this petition called the Freedom Law Petition, which did achieve 4,135 signatures, which was quite a significant number and was enough to get the Reichstag to actually vote on this. However, this law was defeated because only 38.8 13, no, 13.8% of the electorate was for this law. So that wasn't really passed. Well, from 1924 to 1928, there's this period in Germany called the Golden Age. It was a period of cultural flourishing and general economic recovery. Apparently, there's this debate as to whether it was a myth or whether it was just, it was an actual thing or a myth. And well, I'm going to give you a few examples so you can make up your mind if you want. Well, the Golden Age in music, this is serialism. An example is Concerto by Anton Webner, or a Suite for Piano Op. 25 by Arnold Schoenberg. And a description of this would be irregular, abstract, arrhythmic, dramatic, uncomfortable, atonal. And this really appealed to young people and those living in urban areas because it was something cheerful following a darker period. And the objective of serialism in general was to express emotions of freedom and innovation, from beauty, experimental, equalizing. Anyone could do it. I've personally listened to these and I don't like them. They're really weird. But people at the time really, really loved this. Also, in literature, there was a huge movement, notably the autobiography of George Grosz, published in 1955, but 55 or 25? Well, George Grosz, he lived in the Golden Age. Well, he had received several severe injuries and shell shock, had a general negative and pessimistic view of the world. He thought the German people had been forgotten by the government and was physically and mentally scarred, as well as thinking that this period of regression was coming, which at the time seemed wild, but now thinking back on it, he was right. 1930s were not good. And the themes of this autobiography were criticism towards higher classes, political descriptions that would alter and destroy lives, depression, deformation, dehumanization, lack of hope, downbeat, really pessimistic. There were also, in art, there is this really famous painting, Eclipse of the Sun, which gives an example of how censorship was seen in Weimar Germany. Well, there wasn't much. So severe criticism was allowed. This allowed freedom of expression and is a sign of a completely democratic government. In Nazi Germany, you did these kind of paintings? I wouldn't want to be you. And then this didn't really exist in any other nation. This was really, really a new concept that Germany was at the forefront, culturally and politically. Then in architecture, there was also a huge movement, like the Bauhaus movement. The significance meant that, famously the Bauhaus School of Art and Design in Dresden. Well, significance, it provided a welcoming attitude to vehicles and machines, no decoration, away from beauty. There was basic colors and shapes, simple economic use of space. It was more functional and practical rather than the pre-war buildings that were really decorative, really look at how wealthy we are. Pre-war was elaborate, ornamental, decorative, and the message I wanted to transmit this Bauhaus architecture was that it was simple, it transmitted order, it was modern, new, cutting edge, away from the past, really shows a change. Efficient, serious, not showing off. And this can be seen as Germany maturing, but also that they didn't even have the money to show off. So okay. Then also movies. The film was also really developed during this period, most notably with the American film Blue Angel, 1929. I don't know, why did I say 1929? I don't know the year. Blue Angel, starring German actress Marlene Dietrich. It showed the gender roles of women because it showed her being powerful, erotic, attractive, sexual, and using her sexual power over men and kind of swapping traditional gender roles. Also, it shows that people were changing their attitudes towards Weimar Germany. They were more accepting and they recognized the effort Germany was doing to get out of this economic crisis. And it showed how World War I Germany and everything that came before was nothing with the new Germany. Theater also really thrived. It was satirical, involved ordinary people. It was realism as opposed to fictional, and based on the modern rather than in the past. Berlin nightlife. Currently, Berlin nightlife is one of the most known ones, one of the most fun ones, I think. But also at the time, it was too. It involved all kinds of sexualities, really, really accepting, very lively enjoyment, completely different from tradition. Because traditionally, like being all this liberal would be a huge no-no. Also, scandalous cabarets were performing everywhere, and the nightlife was really thriving. And there was this openness and acceptance towards homosexuals, really more advanced than any other European country at the time, which meant that homosexuals came to Berlin. And a lot of them moved to Berlin because they liked this Weimar atmosphere. This is all good and all, but once Hitler came into power, these homosexuals would go on to be prosecuted. So at the time, they came because it was really accepting. Then many left because they realized they were going to die if they stayed, and many did. Well, they were seen as more feminine, but there was representation, so there was more positive attitudes towards homosexuals. I mentioned literature before, and I'm going to mention another novel that really exemplifies, because the other one represented more attitudes towards Weimar Germany. This one is examples of literature. This is All Quiet on the Western Front, 1929, and it shows two themes of Weimar literature. Expressionism, showing the internal mental state of characters away from the plot, more concentrating on the thoughts and the feelings. And utilitarianism, which meant that literature was not just for entertainment, but also for that it served a social and political purpose. The themes of literature it didn't have to be all war. It was all war, anti-war, and the senselessness and the brutality and the destruction it caused. But it was also really pacifist. It was thinking about real life, criticism of society. No, not stabbing the back like many politicians were trying to pass. And it was more pacifist. There was a society. We shouldn't fight each other. And this was all good and all, and you can see all these examples of how culture was really flourishing at the time. But there were groups that were opposed to all this. For example, the Wandervogel movement. The ideas that they were threatened by was that architecture, the ideas of beauty and education, nationalism, traditional gender and sexual ideals, they were being abandoned. They were now a thing of the past, and people who participated in this Wandervogel movement, they had none of it. They wanted the traditional values back. These groups were those loyal to veterans, the church, really people in rural areas. And what these groups did, well, they themselves went back to traditional activities. They moved towards right wing, thought the people, like only the minority participated, they were culturally degenerate. And well, they continued to live in the countryside and live their lives. And the whole vulnerable movement emerged, and it's this essentially. So as you can probably tell by all that, there were a range of different groups in society, and some benefited, some didn't. So let's look at them. First of all, vulnerable people. Their pros, well, 1924, there was help to the poor and destitute that was given to them. 1925, the state accident insurance helped sick people and disabled people too. 1927, the National Unemployment Insurance provided benefits for the unemployed. However, there were also cons. This was extremely expensive. There were 800,000 war veterans, 360,000 war widows, and 900,000 war orphans. So quite a few people who were vulnerable. The money they got was from the DOS plan and USA loans, and this is perfect up until the collapse of the Wall Street crash, of the Wall Street market. Yeah, that was they relied on these helps, but once the American economy collapsed, they were worse off. And also despite all this help, they did still have to pay taxes, which increased. So that didn't go well for them. Another group of society, which by the way, these could all you could be a vulnerable person and be a woman and be young, and you would be not living your best life. But for women, the pros was that by 1925, 36% of German workers were women. This meant that women also could use their sexual power over men. They had voting rights and increased role in politics. For example, Clara Zetkin from the KPD. The new woman was created, which was free, independent, and sexual, just generally liberated. And there were groups in society for women who also felt really traditional. For example, the BDF, the League of German Women, which were 900,000 strong. It was very traditional, but it was in society. They had a group, they could join something. So it wasn't that they were just left alienated by this neoliberal society. They could still join groups. However, not everything was perfect for women at the time. Obviously, abortion was illegal, so it meant that every year there were around 10 to 12,000 deaths. If you were a married woman and both you and your husband worked, you would be attacked as a double earner and blamed for all male unemployment. Also, the Civil Code of 1896 was still in place, as well as having no female representation in the Reichsrat and no actual no female leader of any political party, any prominent political party. And there were demobilization laws passed that meant that women had to leave their jobs so that ex-soldiers had jobs. So if an ex-soldier or veteran walked in and said, "Hey, I need a job," and there was a woman there, the woman would be kicked out. For young people, things were, the same thing. Some things went well, some things didn't. Good thing is that juvenile crime generally fell in the cities. It was easier to get into gymnasiums in the Weimar Republic, which was one of the best education systems in Europe, and it still is. And an introduction of elementary school, kindergarten, which was in the Weimar period. However, not everything was perfect for young people. Unemployment in 1925 and 1926 was quite high. Like I said, 3 million in 1926. But 17% of this was in the age bracket of 14 to 21. There was an emergence of youth cliques in major cities like Hamburg and Cologne, which stole and vandalized. Juvenile crime did fall, but youth cliques emerged. The church was still involved in education, and there was a lot of extremist youth groups, most notably the Hitler Youth, which were 13,000 strong by 1929. This is before the Nazis came into power. Then the last group I'm going to look at is the Jews. Well, the Jews actually had quite an alright time during the Weimar period, especially during this golden age. Well, 500,000 Jews lived in the Weimar Republic. Around 80% of them living in big cities. Some patriotic, one's dissimulation. They were really successful in businesses, in press and newspapers. For example, the Berliner Tageblatt and the Frankfurter Zeitung. And in politics with Theodor Wolff in the DDP, Rosa Luxemburg and Hugo Haas from the left wing, Walter Rathenau, who was foreign minister, the Rathenau family in general. In 1927, they controlled a huge electrical firm called AEG. They also owned 50% of all private banks, they were 16% of lawyers, 11% of doctors, and owned almost half of the cloth firms in Germany. They did have very little importance in industrial areas, and anti-Semitism was on the rise, especially in extremist groups like NASDAQ, which were the Nazis. And many Germans did identify the Jews as aliens. They didn't really accept them. And as the 1920s went on, the role of Jewish banking declined. So now I'm going to be talking about the 1925 presidential election. First of all, we have Carl James, the candidates I'm going to go through. Carl James from the DVP and the NVP, Otto Braun from the SPD, Wilhelm Marx from the CCP, Ernst Stallman from the KPD, and Paul von Hindenburg, which I think went independently. Well, the outcome meant that what happened? Carl James from the DVP, the NVP, withdrew in favor of Hindenburg. So Hindenburg got the supporters from that. Brown withdrew from favor of Marx, so the voters from the SPD went into the CCP. However, Thälmann was still standing, which meant the left vote was split. This resulted in Hindenburg winning with 48.3% of the vote. This is not majority, but the left vote was split between Marx, who had a 45.3% of the vote, and Thälmann, who had a 6.4% of the vote. So if they had just unified the left-wing vote, Hindenburg would have not been president. So political parties in Weimar Germany, there are quite a few. Well, I'm gonna go from left to right. Well, KPD, SPD, DDP, CCP, DVP, DMVP, and NASDAQ. Those are all of them. Well, let's start with the KPD. Well, they were really anti-republic. The Spartacus Revolt, for example, that was KPD. They helped split the left-wing vote in the 1925 presidential election because they didn't collaborate with the SPD. They had 1.62 seats in the Reichstag, which meant that they lost power as the period went on. I'm going to go over the seats in the Reichstag each party had in a second. They were influenced by Russia, and they were from the extreme left, and their candidate was Thälmann. Then the SPD. Well, they were the most prominent party in the beginning of at the establishment of the Weimar Republic. But by this point, they had a decline in influence, which meant that there were more extremist parties present in coalitions. They didn't really appeal to women, young people, farmers, and although they did want democracy, apparently they only took part in 1/6 of all the coalitions that were present. They weren't open-minded at all, and they were really unwilling to cooperate. They didn't cooperate with the KPD. They appealed mostly to industrial workers, and they were the largest single party in the Reichstag, and they'd have a leading role in the revolutions of 1918. But they also had close links with trade unions, but because of coalitions, they weren't always the party with the most power. Then you have the DDP. These were supported by more professionals and academics, and generally, because of coalitions, held more power than the SPD. They were willing to compromise, and they were really pro-democracy. However, because of their internal disputes, they did lose support. Then the CCP. Well, you need to know they're in their center, Catholic Center Party. They lost to Hindenburg and took part in coalitions, with them leading 3 of them. And Chancellor Brüning actually came from the CCP. Then we have the DVP. These were right-wing, more towards the center. Right after Stresemann died, Stresemann actually came from this. He had more left-wing policies, but did come from the DVP. And well, they were supported by rich people and did believe in parliamentary democracy, and was founded in 1918. Then the DMVP. These were against the Young Plan, and were against taking money from the USA in general, because they thought that money was tainted. It's not good. Little did they know they were right. They appealed to landowners, professional classes, and people like Hugenberg, I got that right, who opposed the Republic. They were against coalitions and wanted a restoration of the monarchy. And they wanted the Kaiser back, essentially. And they made a pact with the NASDAQ and were far-right nationalists, completely anti-democracy. And then at the extreme right, and no one can tell me otherwise, the Nazis were extreme right. I'll probably do a video on this at one point, but yes. Well, Nazis, they organized themselves as a legal political party after the Bureau Push, and Hitler was allowed to speak in public again in 1927. By 1927, they had 75,000 members, so they were quite a prominent party. They had to use democracy because they couldn't gain power through any pushes, and while they were banned in 1928 officially as a political party that could participate in elections, the party still existed, but they couldn't really participate. This is 1924, 1928, and in Nazi culture, these are called the wilderness years. Also, the words nationalist and socialist are really contradictory, and it takes part in the confusion of, are the Nazis left-wing, are the Nazis right-wing? In 1928, they began getting a lot of prominence in politics, with them winning 12 seats in the Reichstag. And like I said, during the wilderness years, 1925, they were rebranded. but they didn't participate in elections up until 1928. So, what are the attitudes to the republic in general? Well, from the army, the civil service, and the judiciary, they were hostile to parliamentary democracy. They think that this republic is born out of betrayal to the fatherland, and that the election of Hindenburg, the elite, well, they thought this election would mean that a more authoritarian rule would be put in place. And this wasn't the case during the first term, because up until 1932, that was when the second election took place, Hindenburg really used democracy. 1932 onwards, he did use more the Article 48. Also, industrial workers, they felt that the Republic hadn't really delivered its promises of greater equality and social justice. Well, yes, they crushed revolts, but the fact that there were any revolts to crush meant that democracy was ailing. It was falling behind. It was failing. Well, the Mittelstand, yeah, they welcomed economic and political stability, but they kind of wanted more. Well, I mentioned Stresemann a while back, and I'm going to get back to him in a second. Well, he had, like I said, 5 foreign policy aims. Policy fulfillment, which was to cooperate first as much as they could to try and reduce the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. To improve relationship with France, they shared the border. They were the harshest by far, and they were the Western Front. Then maintain the relationship with Russia, established in Rapallo in 1922, and they were the Eastern Front. So he needed to keep the good relations with both the Western and the Eastern Front. Then, it had 6 aims. Then improve trade links, especially with the USA. If they wanted to keep their economy up, they need to ally themselves with the world's strongest economy, the US. Then forge a lasting peace, basically stay away from war, don't cause any conflict, and end passive resistance in the war. So let's go through this. First of all, the reparations agreement. Well, the aims were to get loans and make reparations gradual, and then to get loans and make payments gradual, and to generally reduce reparations. The details, well, the first one, the Dawes Plan, 16th of August 1924 in the US, and then the Young Plan, really did from the establishment to the implementation, like from when it was drawn up to when it was actually implemented, August 1929 to September 1st, 1930. This, past the Wall Street crash. Well, what was it? Well, in general, both these plans combined, well, reparations payments were resumed, 1 billion paid in the first year, and then 2.5 billion marks increase over 5 years, as well as an 800 million Reich gold mark loan for 5 years as well. A general promise to evacuate the Rhineland, and 70% of payments written off until 1988. It was generally a success because there was optimism and industry was stimulated. But it was a failure because some parties like NASDAQ opposed it. Then we have the Locarno Pact. The aim was to repair relations with France. The details, it was signed in 1925 in Locarno, Switzerland, by Britain, France, and Germany. What was it? It was a combination of the Rhineland Pact and the Arbitration Pact, which meant that if there was a border dispute, it would go to the League of Nations, and that Germany finally accepted its western borders would not change. It was really a success because it was the first time that Germany had formally accepted the loss of Alsace-Lorraine and Normandy. And it meant that Germany was now treated as equal as France, leaving the war, because they left. And it did contribute to Stresemann winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1926. However, it was a failure because the eastern borders were by no way recognized in the same manner, and the Germans weren't pleased because, yes, the French left, but they didn't believe they started the war, so that wasn't good for them. Then the League of Nations membership. Well, the aim was to get Germany to join the League of Nations. Obviously, in September 1926, Germany was finally admitted into the League despite the League's formation in 1918. Germany was not allowed to join in 1919. Well, the success was that it was now considered an equal power alongside World War One victories. There was complete rehabilitation and an elevation to the global leader status, and it did contribute to Stresemann's appointment as an appointment him given the prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, 1926. I mean, Germany was admitted into the League of Nations and put on the Security Council without having to contribute any troops. But some parties just saw this as an extension of the Treaty of Versailles. Most notably, well, extremist parties like the DNVP, NASDAQ, extreme right wing mainly. Then the Treaty of Berlin was signed, and their aim was to renew the old Treaty of Berlin and improve relations with Russia on the eastern borders. It was signed in Berlin in 1926, and it stated that Germany would remain neutral with Russia. It would build on the relationships between Germans and the USSR, as established in the Rapallo Treaty of 1922. And it would, like I said, improve relations with Russia, which meant that the US and France kind of had to be nice, because if they weren't, if they angered Germany and they angered Russia, they would be sorry for that. Also, the terms would have to be held for 5 years, and it was a general neutrality if they went into war, so they wouldn't attack each other. I'm not saying that they would not invade no. I'm not saying that they would help each other, they would just not invade each other. And they also shared military information. It was a general success because it did rekindle an old relationship with the enemy. But it was kind of a failure because the relationships, yes, this agreement was signed, but relations would continue to crumble over 3 years. And it was not an agreement to help. Then we had the Calabrian Pact. The aim was generally to achieve world peace, while Germany was now at the forefront to prevent war. It was signed in 1928 in Paris, and it included 63 nations that would not go to war because they would settle disputes diplomatically as well as monitoring disarmament. It was generally a success because it was included as an equal power. The Germans could expand their economy through other ways. Germany was painted in this brilliant light, and there was general peace after signing this. There wasn't really any major conflicts until 1930. Well, it was kind of a failure also because people in Germany, felt resentful. Then that was the policy of the aim of the end of Allied occupation. Well, the aim was to free Germany from foreign troops, and there were several stages. 1923, which was the Ruhr. 1926, which was when they came out of Zone 1 after the League of Nations membership. 1929, when they came out of Zone 2 after the Calabrian Pact, and then when they finally came out of Zone 3 in 1930. And it was just a success. There's no failure here because Germans really felt confident and there was no foreign people in Germany. So now, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, is the elections from 1920 to 1933. And I'm going to go party by party. I could go year by year, but I'm going to go to show you how different parties evolved. Well, first of all, the KP. In 1920, they had 4 seats in the Reichstag. In May 1924, they had 62 seats. In December 1924, they had 45 seats. 1928, they had 54 seats. 1930, they had 37 seats. July 1932, they had 89 seats. November 1932, they had 100 seats. And they had 81 seats in 1933. So from May 1924 to 1933, the seats were going up and down, up and down, up and down. So they had not a stable hold on power. They had more general one. Yes, the KPD are there, but they weren't the most popular party, but not the least popular one. Then the USPU. It was kind of, I didn't mention it before because it wasn't really significant. They are not he had 22 seats in 1919 and 84 seats in 1920, and they are not in any other. They're not in the Reichstag after this. So they're not really that significant in the Weimar Golden Age. So that's why I didn't mention them before. Then we have the SPD. These are by far the largest political party in the Reichstag up until the Nazis came. So in 1919, they had 165 seats. 1920, 102 seats. May 1924, 100 seats. December 1924, 131 seats. 1928, 154 seats. 1930, 143 seats. July 1932, 133 seats. November 1932, 121 seats, and 1933, 120 seats. So you can see there were huge numbers compared to the KPD. The KPD had at its peak 100 seats in November 1932, but at its peak the SPD had 165. They never peaked after the 1919 elections, but they were quite prominent. Then the DDP. They had 75. They had, alright membership at the beginning, but then by the end, not good. 1919, they had 75 seats. 1920, 39 seats. May 1934, they had 28 seats. December 1924, it's 32 seats. 1928, 25 seats. 1930, 20 seats. July 1932, 4 seats. November 1932, 2 seats. And 1933, 5 seats. So they were really prominent at the beginning, but really fell in power because moderate left wing just wasn't cutting it anymore. You need to be the right wing or extreme left, or moderate to extreme left, like the SPD. Then the CCP, they were quite stable, like the KPD during this period. They had 91 seats in 1919, 85 seats in 1920, 81 seats in May 1924, 88 seats in December 1924, 78 seats in 1928, 68 seats in 1930, 75 seats in July 1932, 70 seats in November 1932, and 73 seats in 1933. So, quite stable membership, the CCP. Then you have the DVP. DVP, during the Golden Age, they actually had quite a significant membership. Then, by the end, they lost prominence, like the DDP. Really moderate, center-leaning parties, not that popular. They had 19 seats in the 1919 election, 65 seats in 1920, 45 seats in May 1924, 51 seats in December 1924, 45 seats in 1928, 30 seats in 1930, 7 seats in July 1932, 11 seats in November 1932, and just 2 seats in 1933. By the way, the reason I stopped counting in I started 1919 was the first elections of the Weimar government, Weimar Republic, and then I stopped counting in 1933 because, after March 1933, there were no elections, so I can't really count them. Then the DMEP, they peaked in December 1924 for some reason, and then they gradually fell in power, but they joined NASDAQ, so not too bad for them. They had 44 seats in 1919, 71 seats in 1920, 95 seats in May 1924, 103 seats in December 1924 for some reason, 73 seats in 1928, 41 seats in 1930, 37 seats in July 1932, 54 seats in November 1932, and 52 seats in November 1932, and 52 seats in 1933. And then we have NASDAQ. They had, here it says that I had 32 seats in May 1924 and 14 seats in December 1924, but I don't know, I don't count them, because I'm not sure how reliable that data is. But then 1928, that's when you really need to take note of NASDAQ. They had 12 seats in 1928, 107 seats in 1930, almost 100 seats more. Then by July 1932, 230 seats. So 113 seats more. No, 123 seats more. Then they lost them in November 1932. They had only 196 seats. Which, by the way, when Goebbels saw this, that they had lost seats in the Reichstag, he was distraught and actually threatened to commit suicide. And then 1933 had 288 seats, but by this point they were already in power. And that is it. That is module 2 of Weimar, the Golden Age in Weimar, Germany, for A-level history, AQA. And yeah, that is all the information you need. The collapse of the Grand Coalition is there, but that's just integrated. And the collapse, you can see that, that's more kind of module 3, the collapse of the Grand Coalition, so forget what I just said. And yeah, that is the Golden Age of Weimar Germany. I don't really know what else to say, so I'm just gonna leave it here. Yeah, thank you for watching, and I really hoped it helped. Bye!